Alright, welcome back to part 5 of the Animatronic Rod Puppet project. It's been a good while since I made an update, although not for a lack of working on this thing. But you know, we're nearly there now. I've also done some sculpts, made the moulds, cast some eyes and teeth, built the mechanisms, and created a foam body. In the next 2 videos I've demonstrated how I went about getting to that stage because it's a bit of a leap from where we left off, so be sure to keep an eye out for that. So I think in part 4 I demonstrated how I modelled an underskull, grew the parts and assembled a core that would take the sculpt of the creature I'm making. So this is my last video and this is the underskull I designed in Blender. So I've just grown the parts, epoxied them together and used some fiberglass to make it solid. And this core I'm going to use here will have the sculpt done on top of. And this is a design I did in ZBrush, what the character is essentially going to try to look like at least. So what I'm going to do is just start creating the sculpture. I'm putting down a base thickness because this is obviously a mechanical skin. I need to know that there's a minimum thickness in certain areas. So I've kind of heard that 3.5 to 6.5 mil is pretty typical, but I'm just going to do a base one first of about 3 mil, and basically anything else that goes on top will be the design. I'm just using some basic tools to get everything kind of conformed out and just a basic flat layer, and then I'll start the sculpture. So I'm just laying down a different colour clay here, so you can see there's a contrast, so I know how thick I've gone, or how deep I've gone rather. And just basically making some rough forms loosely tied to my design, and I want to keep this fairly simplistic. Like I said, it's a mechanical skin, so I don't want to go too crazy or too deep in certain areas. I want to know that it will still function. And just using a bunch of little tools, rakes and guitar string tools, just to kind of refine it back and add details here and there. This is a little bit of lighter fluid, or you can use IPA just to kind of smooth out those. There's scales, there's kind of supposed to be scales. I mean, I don't even know what this guy looks like. You know, my partner says a cross between a flying monkey and a dragon, or he's going to have horns coming out the side of his head. So, oh, and that little ridge is because there's going to be fur butted up there. I've seen a puppet making technique where you can cut like a little ridge, and when you're putting fur down, it kind of sits in there, and you don't see that seam line. So a bit of baby powder, you can use something else, and this plastic sheet, I just kind of go in and score some deep lines and ridges and creases of where I want to put the texture and detail. You can see on that camera left eye there, I've started adding some creases and lines. And just slowly moving my way around. This is a piece of reticulated foam. It's the kind of foam you get in fish pond filters. I just stole this out of our Hoover. I need to put that back. And just slowly going over, refining, knocking back with the sponge. The sponge just kind of breaks up the surface and adds some pores. And I've got a rake tool that I kind of go over and rake it all back with as well, and just repeat. Some little dots there and dimples, little spots and blemishes. Just anything that I see. I've got a bunch of reference images up on my computer of every type of animal, but you can see that after a while it starts to create this texture, this skin-like texture, and I'm not the most competent of sculptors. I mean, you could work on this for weeks and weeks and weeks. I'm still under a bit of a deadline to try and get this done as quick as possible, so just you know, adding depth and detail to those scales and trying to break up the surface a bit. And you know, a bit of clean up on the core and key there. Get this all ready. It looks pretty good. It'll certainly do. Little ears, those little holes there for some horns. I'm going to make some horns that are going to stick out the side of the head. And there's a couple of final images. So I'm just going to make a mould now. I'm using a Compact 45, it's a Smooth-on product, and this is a urethane molding rubber. I'm just putting on one layer and rubbing it into the surfaces, and get an airbrush and make sure there's no air bubbles sitting there, and essentially just build it up slowly with those first 2 layers. And then I add these polyfibers, this polyfiber stuff kind of thickens up and makes the urethane a bit more like I don't know, like a peanut butter consistency. And the more you add, it can even get thick as like a bread dough. And I just kind of build it up in layers and putting this final one on so I can add some keys, because obviously I want to have a hard core around here, and that needs to lock into something. I'm just going to draw a parting line down the center and cover everything in a coat of Miracle Glass. I've already sprayed that wooden board, but it's with a crystal clear acrylic, but it's good just to put a layer of gloss down. And a bit of parting wall and some supports on the back. And I'm just going to build some little keys so that the two parts can fit together nicely when I finish that. So I've got the freeform air. It's a A and B 1-to-1 mix, and it's like a epoxy dough. You mix this stuff together, and it's because I've got a little room here. It's just a bit cleaner for me to do this than plaster. So I just splashed out a bit. It's a bit more expensive, and I'm going to use this to make a 2-part hardcore mould. Just packing it all in there. It's pretty good stuff to use. It's not very messy. It's very strong. And just leaving it overnight. Did a bit of sanding and cleaning up on the edges. I'm just going to kind of work it open. It came apart fine. Locks back in nicely. So my character also has hands and feet, so I need to sculpt those too. And this is like a little idea I had. It's a mechanism that's going to go over the U-joint where the hands have attached to rods. And here in Fusion, I've just designed my mechanisms and made some cores. So this core will essentially sit inside the negative mold and take up a space, like a void. So when I go to put in a mechanism later on, there's a cavity that it'll fit into. So these like little keys that I've made that I can do the sculpture on and then take a mold from. So I'm doing all 4 at the same time, trying to keep an eye on the size, proportions, shape, and trying to make them all as symmetrical as possible. Just checking it here and there. And it's got a set of grabby hands. There's a mechanism that I'll show you in a couple more videos from now. I've made this little hand mechanism. So these hands are extended ever so slightly, so the top 2 fingers will kind of curve round, so like a little grabby action. And just same sort of tools, you know, just refining it back and trying to, you know, image resource wise, I think I was looking at the Ninja Turtles hands. I was thinking you could do any hand you want, and it's such a weird looking creature anyway, so why not turtle hands and turtle feet? I just like the shape of them. Pretty typical. Most creatures have those kind of 2 fingers and a thumb. And I just did some final images here. So obviously those keys will go into the mold and take out space, and the feet are just going to be silicone. So you can see there I've just put some clay around the core just to work as a bit of a flange working up to that area. And I'm going to do the same kind of mold. It's the Compact 45 Urethane Rubber. Put on a layer, hit it with the airbrush, just burst any bubbles sitting on there, and slowly work it up. Same with the feet. I'm just going to put these little cups around because obviously there's a key here, and I'll make an outer mold as well for it. And just putting on a thicker layer and working it over. Cured overnight, and just put a parting seam down the middle. Apply some more wax to the surfaces, and because I've pretty much run out of money by now, I'm doing a 2-part plaster bandage mold. I splashed out a bit more on the plaster bandages. They're a Gypsona brand, so they're a bit tougher. And they came apart no problem, locked back together pretty good. It's got that key there to keep some stability anyway, so I think it'll be alright. So my creature also has a stomach. I designed it with a belly and a chest at the front of the torso there. So I've taken like a rough mold of the torso, and I'm going to use this as a base to kind of make it's going to be a sculpt of the stomach and chest, but I'm going to do this as a little slush cast mold. It's not going to have an incredible amount of detail, just something that's going to sit on the front and be surrounded by fur anyway. So I'm just keeping this very, very quick, very cheap and loose, because I'd have already been working on a lot more on this project prior to this, so this is like one of those last steps I just want to smash out and get done. But just being a nice thin skin to go on that front stomach, I think it will curve and bend and flex nicely. It's going to be silicone with some deadener in it. So just going to make a mould of this, Compact 45, brush it on. Being less careful this, well, I'm still being careful, you know, just getting on and getting it done. And a thicker layer, like a dough kind of layer. And I'm just going to coat this in some plaster bandage. So there we go. That's my mold. That's my mold for the core and the face. Obviously, it's came out pretty good. Can't see any blemishes or air bubbles. I'm pretty happy with that. It's nice and strong, nice and smooth. Locks back into that two-part mold nicely. I just added some bolts to keep it together. Here's the core, and I've just added some holes. Obviously, going to be bleed holes where the silicone come out through. I'm going to have some little balls of clay that I'll fill these up with as the silicone starts to come through. And I've added this pour spout here, so I can either do injection mold or gravity mold, and just shove that back into the negative. And when I pour the silicone through that tube, it should fill up that void and give me a silicone skin. In theory. And the stomach came out okay, captured all that detail. Like I said, there's nothing special with this. I'm just going to do a slush layer and have a nice thin silicone skin that I can put over the stomach. The hands and feet, obviously the two-part plaster bandage, outer core there. And it's kind of like a glove mold, I suppose. Technically is a glove for that little clay hand. But those keys do it back in there nicely. There's little holes for it to sort of line back up with. Yep, captured all the detail. Not really any air bubbles or blemishes. If there is anything, we can just patch it later, but looks pretty good to me. Some of the detail of the feet seems to be alright. So pretty happy. So now that I've got my molds, I can go about looking to cast a silicone skin. That skin will then be painted, fitted over the mechanisms of my character. So stick around for the next video because I'm going to show how I went about making some eyeballs, a pair of teeth and the underskull that this core was originally based around. So thanks very much for coming along, and I hope to see you next time. Cheers.